Lauren, your little independent life in Colorado Springs is nothing but a selfish fantasy that's hurting everyone. Your sister Megan has been picking up your slack for years while you play career woman. We didn't raise you to turn your back on family when we need you most. I've already made some calls to your office. Jordan Fletcher knows the kind of daughter you are. Fix this now, or we'll ensure no one in this town ever looks at you the same way again. Hi, my name is Lauren Hayes. I am 33 years old. My hands were shaking so hard the papers they shoved at me in that parking lot almost slipped right through my fingers and my stomach twisted into this sick knot that made the asphalt feel like it was tilting under my heels. 1 second I was locking my car after a normal shift at the distribution center. The next, my parents were blocking my path with these printed agreements demanding I co-sign for my older sister's latest failed venture and hand over access to my savings account, like it was still theirs to control. My mind was spinning out of control, flashing between rage and this weird numb panic, because how could they do this here right outside my job after I had spent years building a life 3 states away from their house? I kept thinking this had to be some nightmare that any minute I would wake up and laugh it off, but their faces were dead serious and my father's voice kept echoing in my ears about calling my supervisor Jordan Fletcher. And suddenly I couldn't breathe right, like the Colorado air had gone thin and sharp all at once. Everything I had clawed for my apartment, my promotion last quarter, the quiet routines that finally felt like mine was crumbling in real time while they stood there acting like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. My thoughts kept fracturing, one moment furious that they would threaten my reputation like that, the next terrified that maybe they were right, and I really was the selfish one for finally saying no. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stand there, frozen heart hammering like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. If you've ever had your own parents corner you after work and basically threaten to torch your entire career unless you bail out your older sister again, drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done in that parking lot. Because I was one breath away from losing it completely, and I need to know I'm not the only one who's felt that kind of chaos. I managed to snatch the papers and shove them into my bag without signing anything. Then I turned on my heel and practically ran to my car, slamming the door so hard the whole frame shook. My parents didn't chase me. They just stood there watching with these satisfied little smiles that made my skin crawl like they knew they had already planted the seed. And it was only a matter of time before it grew into something that would drag me right back under their thumb. The drive home through the familiar streets of Colorado Springs felt surreal, every stoplight stretching out forever, while my brain kept replaying their words on a loop. The way my father had casually dropped my supervisor's name, like it was no big deal. By the time I pulled into the parking spot at my apartment complex, I was breathing too fast and my hands wouldn't stop trembling. So I sat there for a full 10 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel, trying to piece together how we had gotten here. My older sister, Megan Hayes, had always been the one who needed fixing. First, it was her string of bad boyfriends, then the failed boutique she opened downtown last year that was bleeding money faster than anyone could keep up with. My mother, Patricia Hayes, and my father, Robert Hayes, had poured everything into her, always framing it as family helping family. But somehow that help never seemed to come with an expiration date or any expectation that my older sister should actually stand on her own. I had moved out at 22, worked 2 jobs to put myself through night classes, and landed this solid logistics coordinator role at the distribution center where I handled supply chain data that actually mattered. None of that seemed to count for them. In their eyes, I was still the spare part, the one who could be squeezed whenever my older sister's latest crisis hit. I called my best friend Taylor Evans the second I got inside my apartment, pacing the small living room, while the words tumbled out in this frantic mess. Taylor listened without interrupting, her voice steady on the other end, as she said she'd come over right away with takeout and we could figure out what to do. She had seen this pattern before, the way my parents would pop up every few months with some new demand dressed up as concern, but this time felt different, sharper, more calculated. While I waited for her, I pulled out the papers they had forced on me and scanned the fine print, my eyes blurring with angry tears. It wasn't just a loan cosign, it was a full family support agreement that would give them oversight of my finances and require me to move back into their guest room temporarily until my older sister's business stabilized. The thought of packing up my life again made my chest tighten so hard I had to sit down on the couch and put my head between my knees. Taylor showed up 20 minutes later, her arms full of tacos from our favorite spot on Academy Boulevard, and we spread everything out on the coffee table like some kind of war room. She read the documents twice, her face getting tighter with every page, and finally looked up at me with this mix of disbelief and fury. "They can't actually force this, Lauren. This is straight up coercion." Her words should have made me feel better, but instead, they just fed the unstable swirl in my head because part of me still wondered if fighting back would only make everything worse. We stayed up late talking strategy, me rambling about how I had quietly kept a backup of my old family financial logins from years ago when I helped set up their online accounts, and Taylor warning me to be careful because crossing my parents usually came with consequences that hit sideways. The following morning at work, I was a wreck, jumping every time my phone buzzed and barely able to focus on the shipment reports stacking up on my screen. My supervisor, Jordan Fletcher, pulled me aside during the mid-morning break, his expression unreadable as he closed the door to the small conference room. "Lauren, I got a strange call yesterday from your father. He mentioned some family issues and implied you might need time off, or even a leave of absence to sort things out." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Jordan had always been fair, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes now, like he was weighing whether I was a liability. I tried to explain without sounding hysterical, but the words came out shaky and disjointed, the unstable panic from the parking lot still bleeding into everything I said. He nodded slowly and told me to take the rest of the day if I needed it. But the look he gave me as I left the room felt like the first crack in the foundation I had worked so hard to build. I drove straight to a quiet coffee shop on the north side of town instead of going home, ordering the strongest drink they had and pulling out my laptop in a back booth where no one would bother me. The unstable energy in my chest wouldn't settle. It kept pushing me to do something, anything, before my parents' threats became reality. Using the old backdoor credentials I still had from when I used to troubleshoot their accounts, I logged into the family financial portal and started digging. At first, it was just small things, credit card charges I didn't recognize, transfers that looked off, but then I found the pattern. Regular withdrawals from a joint account labeled Support for M that were far larger than anything my older sister could have needed for her boutique. My hands were flying across the keyboard now, the unstable rush making me click faster, cross-referencing dates with my own bank statements. What I uncovered next nearly made me drop my phone. My parents had quietly taken out a line of credit in my name 2 years ago, using documents I had left behind during a visit, and they had been making minimum payments while racking up interest that was now ballooning. The statements showed the money flowing straight into accounts tied to my older sister's business, all while they painted me as the unreliable one. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, my vision tunneling for a second as the coffee shop noise faded into a dull roar. I sat there staring at the screen, the unstable swirl in my head turning into something colder and sharper, but still completely unstable, because now I had proof and no idea what to do with it. Taylor texted me right then asking if I was okay, and I typed back a single frantic message before closing the laptop and heading for the exit. The parking lot confrontation had been bad, but this felt like the ground had shifted under my entire life. Just as I was unlocking my car, my phone rang again, this time with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. A calm voice on the other end introduced himself as Attorney Ryan Morales, saying he had been contacted by my mother about a potential family dispute and wanted to discuss options before things escalated. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I had to lean against the car door. How had they moved this fast? I mumbled something noncommittal and hung up, but the call left me reeling, the unstable chaos inside me ratcheting up another notch, because now it wasn't just threats. It was lawyers and paperwork, and the very real possibility that my parents were already building a case to paint me as the problem. I drove home in a daze, the Colorado mountains in the distance looking colder than usual, and when I finally pulled into my spot, I saw a familiar car parked across the street. My uncle Thomas Hayes and my Aunt Linda Hayes were waiting, their faces tight with concern, but I could tell from the way they glanced at each other that they had already heard my parents' version of events. My uncle and aunt got out of their car before I could even close my door, and the way my aunt's eyes flicked toward the papers sticking out of my bag told me everything. They had already heard my parents' version, the one where I was the selfish daughter refusing to help my older sister through another rough patch. My uncle started talking first, his voice low and careful, like he was walking on eggshells, saying my father had called him that afternoon, claiming I was blowing up the family over nothing, and that if I didn't co-sign the loan, my older sister's business would fold and take everyone down with it. I stood there on the sidewalk, feeling the unstable swirl in my chest crank up again, 1 second wanting to scream at them for believing my parents' spin, and the next second wondering if maybe I really was the problem, the one who always pulled away when things got hard. My aunt put a hand on my arm and suggested we go inside to talk it through like reasonable adults. But her tone had that same undercurrent. My parents always used the one that made every suggestion feel like a trap. We crowded into my small living room, and I dumped the documents on the coffee table while my thoughts raced in a dozen directions at once, half of me desperate for them to see the truth, and the other half already bracing for the moment they took my parents' side. My uncle flipped through the pages, his face tightening, and then he admitted my father had asked him to come over and talk some sense into me because apparently I was being dramatic again. The words landed like ice water down my back, and suddenly the unstable panic flipped into this hot, angry rush, because even my uncle and aunt, the only ones I thought might stay neutral, were already carrying water for my parents. Taylor showed up 10 minutes later, still in her scrubs from her shift at the clinic, and the second she saw my uncle and aunt, she shot me this quick look that said she knew exactly what was happening. She jumped in without missing a beat, pointing out how the agreement wasn't just a cosign, but a full financial takeover that would let my parents monitor every dollar I made. My aunt shifted uncomfortably and muttered that family sometimes had to make sacrifices, which only made the unstable storm in my head louder, because sacrifices always seemed to mean me giving up what I had worked for while my older sister got bailed out again. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples as I pulled out my laptop and showed them the backdoor logs I had dug into earlier. The line of credit opened in my name, the transfers funneled straight to my older sister's failing boutique. The room went quiet for a second, but then my uncle sighed and said my father claimed it was all a misunderstanding and that I had agreed to it years ago during one of my visits home. That was when my phone started buzzing on the table, my father's name flashing across the screen, and the unstable energy inside me spiked so hard I almost knocked the phone off the edge trying to silence it. My aunt glanced at it and quietly suggested I answer, that ignoring them would only make things worse, and before I could stop myself, I snatched it up and put it on speaker because part of me wanted them all to hear the same poisonous tone I had been dealing with alone. My father's voice came through sharp and cold, laced with that familiar sarcasm that always cut straight to the bone. "Lauren, I see you've got company. Good. Maybe they can explain why you're turning this into some big betrayal when all we're asking is for you to act like part of this family for once." My mother jumped in right behind him, her tone dripping with that fake sweetness that hid the knife. "Sweetheart, Your sister is drowning, and you're standing on the shore with your little apartment and your little job pretending you don't owe us anything. We raised you better than that. I felt the words like physical punches, the unstable mix of rage and heartbreak making my vision blur as I tried to answer without screaming. Taylor grabbed my hand under the table to steady me while my uncle and aunt exchanged another one of those loaded glances, and I could see the doubt creeping into their faces already. My father kept going, reminding me that Jordan Fletcher at work had been very understanding about family emergencies, and that if I didn't sign by the end of the week, he might have to reconsider my recent promotion because no one wanted drama following an employee around. The threat hung there in the air, and the unstable panic flipped again into this cold dread because I knew my supervisor was already looking at me sideways after that first call. My mother added one last jab before hanging up, her voice soft, but vicious. Think about what this says about you, Lauren. We're trying to keep the family together and you're tearing it apart over a few signatures. The call ended and the silence in my apartment felt heavier than the mountains outside. My aunt started to say something about how maybe a compromise could work, but Taylor cut her off, pointing out that the line of credit alone was already illegal without my knowledge, and that my parents had basically forged access to my credit history. My uncle rubbed his temples and admitted he had loaned my older sister some money last month that was supposed to be for inventory, but had gone toward her personal expenses instead, and now he was worried he wouldn't see it back unless the whole family pitched in. The revelation hit me like another slap, because even the relatives I trusted were tangled up in the same web, and the unstable chaos in my head kept swinging between wanting to burn every bridge and wanting to crawl under the covers and pretend none of this was happening. Later that evening, after my uncle and aunt finally left, promising to talk to my parents and smooth things over Taylor, and I stayed up going through more of the financial records, I found another layer I hadn't seen before, a second account my parents had opened using my social security number from when I was still on their insurance, with thousands funneled toward my older sister's credit card debt, and even a partial down payment on a new car she had leased last spring. The numbers blurred together as my hands shook on the keyboard, the unstable rush making me click through screens so fast I almost missed the timestamp on one transfer that lined up exactly with the day I had gotten my promotion at work. It felt deliberate, like they had been watching and waiting for any sign I was getting ahead so they could pull me back down. Taylor finally convinced me to get some sleep around 2 in the morning, but the second she left, my thoughts spiraled again, replaying every sarcastic jab from my parents and every hesitant look from my uncle and aunt until I was pacing the living room in the dark, heart racing like it might explode. The next morning at work, Jordan pulled me into his office before I could even log into my computer. His face serious as he closed the door and told me he had received another call from my father, this time mentioning ongoing family financial strain and suggesting it might affect my reliability on the team. I tried to explain the words tumbling out in this unstable jumble, but Jordan just nodded and said he was giving me the benefit of the doubt for now, but that I needed to resolve things quickly because the district manager had been copied on the latest message. The implied threat sat there like a weight on my chest as I walked back to my desk, the unstable energy making every notification on my phone feel like another bomb about to go off. I spent the rest of the day jumping between tasks and checking my email obsessively, the unstable panic rising every time I thought about the lawyer's number still sitting in my call log. Around 4 o'clock, my phone lit up with a new text from an unknown number, and when I opened it, the message was short and cold. "This is Ryan Morales again. Your mother has asked me to prepare the paperwork for voluntary conservatorship if you continue refusing to cooperate. We can keep this out of court, but the clock is ticking." My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the edge of my desk, the unstable swirl inside me exploding into full-blown dread, because now it wasn't just pressure. It was the very real threat of losing control over my own life completely. I stared at the screen, my thoughts fracturing in a dozen directions at once, and just as I started typing a reply, my phone rang again, this time with my supervisor's extension flashing on the screen. Jordan's voice came through when I answered, sounding even more strained than before. "Lauren, I need you to come to my office right now. There's been another development and it's not good." I hung up the phone and walked to Jordan's office on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, my mind flipping wildly between pure rage at my parents for dragging my job into this mess and a crashing wave of numb panic that maybe I really was the unreliable one they kept saying I was. The door was already cracked open, and when I stepped inside, I saw not just Jordan, but Sarah Klein from HR, sitting there with a thick folder on her lap, her face all professional, but her eyes avoiding mine like she already knew the script. Jordan cleared his throat and said my father had called the district manager directly this morning, claiming I was having a mental health crisis that was affecting my performance, and that the company might want to look into a leave of absence before things got worse. My stomach lurched so hard I had to grip the back of the chair, the unstable storm in my head, swinging from this "can't be happening" to "what if they're right and I'm just too selfish to see it." Sarah slid a copy of the family agreement across the table and explained in that careful HR voice that while they couldn't force me to sign anything personal, the repeated calls from my parents were creating a documented pattern that could be seen as a workplace disruption. She added that my father had mentioned speaking to several of my colleagues about family support issues, and suddenly, the unstable panic surged again because I pictured everyone in the break room whispering about how dramatic I was. I tried to show them the financial logs on my phone, my hands shaking so bad the screen kept blurring. But Jordan just sighed and said this was above his pay grade now, and that the district manager wanted a resolution by the end of the day, or they'd have to place me on administrative leave to protect the team. The words hit like another slap, and I felt the chaos inside me splinter into a dozen jagged pieces. Half of me wanted to scream the whole story. The other half was already calculating how fast I could pack my desk if I lost this job too. I left the office in a haze and called Taylor from the parking lot, my voice cracking as I spilled everything about the HR meeting and the lawyer's latest threat. She told me to breathe and suggested we meet at her place after work so we could compile everything into one big file and send it to the district manager ourselves. But even as she talked, I could hear the doubt creeping into her tone, like she was starting to wonder if fighting my parents this hard was worth blowing up my whole life. My thoughts kept fracturing. Maybe Taylor was right. Maybe I should just sign the stupid papers and keep my promotion and my apartment and my sanity. But then the rage would surge back, because why should I have to choose between my freedom and my family when my older sister never seemed to pay any price at all? The unstable energy made me drive straight home instead of back to my desk, and when I pulled in, I saw my Uncle Thomas Hayes and my Aunt Linda Hayes waiting on the curb again, this time with my father's car parked right behind them like they had all coordinated the ambush. My aunt started in before I could even get my keys out, saying my mother had called crying about how I was destroying the family over nothing, and that my older sister Megan was on the verge of losing her boutique, and her new boyfriend, Derek Nolan, had already threatened to leave if things didn't stabilize soon. My uncle added quietly that he had put in another $5,000 himself last week, and now he was worried he'd never see it back unless I stepped up. The unstable swirl in my chest flipped from heartbreak to fury in a heartbeat, because even they were acting like this was my responsibility, and I snapped back that I had proof of the line of credit opened in my name without my knowledge. My aunt just shook her head and said my parents had already explained that as a simple paperwork mix-up from when I was still on their accounts years ago. And suddenly the unstable panic crashed into this heavy, defeated fog, because it felt like no matter what evidence I showed, my parents had already rewritten the story. I let them inside anyway, the four of us crowding around my kitchen table while I pulled up more screens on my laptop, my fingers flying so fast they kept missing keys. Taylor arrived 10 minutes later with her own laptop, and the five of us sat there going through every transfer, every forged signature, the unstable energy in the room thick enough to choke on. My phone kept buzzing with texts from my mother, short, sarcastic jabs like, "Still playing the victim, Lauren. Your sister is packing up her shop right now while you sit in your cozy apartment and we gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." Each one made my mind swing harder between wanting to block her forever and wanting to call her back, screaming that she was the one who had been stealing from me. Sarah Klein texted me privately from HR asking if I could come in first thing tomorrow to sign a voluntary performance improvement plan, and the unstable dread hit me again because I knew that was code for "get your family drama under control, or we'll find a way to let you go." The next morning, I went in early, the unstable panic making my coffee taste like acid as I sat across from Jordan and Sarah again. They laid out the improvement plan and said the district manager had spoken to my father one last time, and apparently, my parents had offered to cover any family-related absences if I agreed to the support agreement. I felt the walls closing in my thoughts, fracturing between fighting and folding, and when Sarah mentioned that refusing could lead to a formal review that might affect my references for any future job, the unstable energy finally cracked. I signed the damn family papers right there on the table, my hand shaking so hard the pen left a jagged line across the bottom, choosing the lesser evil of giving in to keep my job and my apartment, even though it felt like selling my soul. Taylor texted me later asking what I had done, and when I told her, she went quiet for a long minute before saying she understood, but that it broke her heart to see me forced into this corner. A couple of weeks later, my older sister called me herself, her voice all bubbly, like nothing had ever happened. She said the boutique was actually turning a profit now, thanks to the family money, and Derek had proposed to her with a ring paid for by my parents, using the very line of credit I had co-signed. My stomach dropped straight through the floor as she laughed and thanked me for finally doing the right thing, completely unaware, or maybe just not caring, that I had lost every ounce of leverage I thought I had. My parents never apologized. Instead, my mother sent a single text saying, "See, family pulls together in the end," and the unstable numbness settled over me like a blanket I couldn't shake. I still had my job and my apartment, but the savings I had worked so hard for were now tied up in my older sister's success, and every time I looked at my bank statement, the unstable regret surged because I had chosen safety over freedom and ended up right back where they wanted me, supporting my older sister while my own dreams quietly shrank. I deleted the financial files that night, the ones that proved everything, because what was the point anymore when the fight had already cost me more than I could afford to lose? My uncle and aunt stopped by once more to say they were proud of me for putting family first, but their words felt hollow, and Taylor's visits grew shorter as the weeks passed, like even she didn't know how to be around the version of me who had finally given in. The Colorado air still felt sharp in the mornings when I drove to work, but now it just reminded me that I had traded my independence for a fragile peace that could shatter the second my parents decided they needed more. In the end, I was still standing still, paying my own bills on paper, but the heavy sadness that never quite left told me I had lost the only thing that really mattered: my belief that I could ever truly break free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to choose between fighting your parents and keeping the life you built only to realize the fight was rigged from the start, tell me in the comments what you would have done differently, because some days I still wonder if there was a way out. I just couldn't see through all the chaos.